hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that their Creator endowed them with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What if I told you that those words, we the people, were never meant to include us? What if I told you that the unity in America was never about universal inclusion, but was about consolidating white power? Many of us have been conditioned to believe in a we that never included us in the first place. How does this reality serve to confuse our ability to identify with our true selves? The reality is that we have inherited a psychological lie that we are constantly fighting to try and identify with. It's time to heal ourselves from the spiritual, emotional, and psychological turmoil that believing this lie brings upon us. It's time to separate fact from fiction, to know who we truly are and who they have always been. This is Afrosynthesis. Ankh in my eye, hotel, peace, what's happening world? I am Ahasa, this is Afrosynthesis, and welcome back to the channel. As you can see from the title, today is episode 23. They are not like us. And this episode all is about getting on one accord and understanding the importance of defining we and they so that we can operate on one accord. And so we're living in a time where pronouns have become more important and more controversial than ever before. And in many cases, you could say this is a direct result of the LGBTQIA+ movement, where pronouns are serving to clarify one's gender identity. But even moving forward from this movement, it also reveals something deeper, which is a confusion about identity in and of itself. For Black people in America, this conversation about identity goes beyond gender and personal preference to one truly of survival and a matter about what it is to be and to live, right? Because as people living in a hostile cultural environment, clarity on who we are and who they are is more crucial than ever before. And so when Kendrick Lamar chants, "They not like us," it's not just a social statement, it's a political declaration. And so today we're going to be navigating America's laws and history and institutions to understand exactly who they have determined their we to be. And so that's the revelation, that the legal and historical definition of we doesn't have us in mind. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in St. Louis, Missouri. So one of the clearest examples of who is and isn't included in the we the people comes from the infamous Dred Scott case, which started here in St. Louis, Missouri, and made its way to the Supreme Court in 1857. What was the Supreme Court's verdict? It was a 7-2 decision, and Chief Justice Robert Taney ruled two things. So for one, the context was that Dred Scott had lived in Illinois and Connecticut for some time, and those were both free states. And so when he traveled back to Missouri, he sued for his freedom. It was obviously very contentious and very controversial. And when it got to the Supreme Court, Justice Robert Taney ruled two things. The first was that no person of African ancestry could be a United States citizen. Dred Scott, they found, had no right to even file a lawsuit. He had no jurisdiction, no political grounding, because the US legal system was one for citizens only, right? And so Taney stated that at the time of the country's founding, black people were inferior or beings of inferior order with no right which the white man was bound to respect. In other words, people of African descent, us, were not a part of the political community. The second thing that they had found was that the Declaration of Independence, which was the formation or was the tenets that began the formulation of what became the United States in America, did not include black people. They mentioned that the infamous phrase, all men are created equal, did not apply to us. And so Chief Justice Taney explicitly wrote that black people were not considered a part of the we and we the people, nor intended to be. So to be clear, when they say we the people, they are not speaking about us. And so this is something that we need to take in and transmute because of the psychological dangers that come from living a false we. This is something that we need to take in and transmute because of the psychological danger of having a false we. If you were like me, you grew up reading books within a Western institution, which means as a consequence that you grew up reading books primarily written by white women and men. Why is this dangerous? Because when they write in first person pronouns using words like we and us, we falsely assume that we are a part of that in group. This is a part of the socialization that happens to people of African descent within Western cultural context. Specifically here in the United States, we are told that we too are Americans and that the promises of the Constitution apply to us. But historical and legal precedent tell us a different story, right? And so if we, the people, never included us, then who is our true we? And that's what we're doing here at Afrosynthesis. We're reclaiming our language, our history, and our political consciousness so that we can move in unison and in harmony. And so they not like us, which begs the question, so who are we, right? If we the people was never meant for us, who is our we? Firstly, we are African people. We are descendants of those who survived the Ma'afa. Remember, Mama Marimba Ani gives us the term Ma'afa to mean the great tragedy, right? Whereas for some political and ideological groups, such as the Jewish people, they have the Holocaust. People of African descent, we have the Ma'afa, the great tragedy. But still, we carry the wisdom of our ancestors. We are the builders of civilization. We are the originators of deep thought and medu neter, or the word and the philosophy of nature, of God. And we are the components of social harmony, right? We are not them, and they are not us. And that is exactly where our strength lies. We must be conscious of our own we and move accordingly, right? And so when I think of we, first and foremost, I think of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. Marcus Garvey recognized over a century ago the political reality and the conscious struggle of people of African descent. He says, and I quote, "I have given my time to the study of the condition of the Negro, here, there, and everywhere. And I have come to realize that he, being us, is still the object of degradation and pity the world over." And so one of the great proteges and documenters of Marcus Garvey's work is Tony Martin. And Tony Martin has a book titled Race First that is about the ideological and political struggles of Black consciousness. And he calls for Black unity because Black unity was seen as a threat to the global fantasy of white supremacy. Interesting that Trump has an America First program, right? Does that not sound like a program for the consolidation of white power in America? So if American First doesn't mean all Americans as we understand from the legal and the political and the social reality, what then is he saying? It becomes more clear. The United States considers Black radical organizations subversive, right? They see Black unity as a direct threat to their power. So I ask, united we stand or divided we fall? Right? Check out Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, the FBI secret file on Black America, to learn more about how America feels about Black unity. European governments, they recorded Black radical organizations as a threat to colonial stability. So again, I'm gonna ask, united we stand or divided we fall, right? One of the great Pan-African scholars and historical figures that we have in our legacy is Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Afrika, which is all about the reality that Europe's wealth is a direct consequence of their destabilization and their extraction of wealth and resources and human intellect and capital in Africa. Marxist and communist organizations, they reject Black nationalism. They refuse to acknowledge the ways that the Black working class struggles differ from that of the white working class. So again, united we stand or divided we fall. It's interesting that these white political ideologies that have a perception of universal struggle and collective work and responsibility always fail to acknowledge the intimate differences between the working classes or the ideological groups that they claim to be service or in service of, right? So check out C.L.R. James, one of our, again, great warrior scholars and ancestors. He has a work called Black Jacobins. And Frantz Fanon, he has a book called The Wretched of Earth, and he speaks to the differences and the critiques of of Marxism and communism and their lack of deep analysis for the differing issues between those of African descent and those of the European ways. But in short, the pattern is clear. The European Asili fears organized, unified, Black or African identity. And so what must we do next, right? What is our homework? Because this conversation isn't just one about history, it's about how do we move forward. And so I have 3 questions for us to meditate on. The first, what cultural and political messages have you internalized that were never meant for you? Second, how can you strengthen your understanding of who we truly are? And third, what steps can you take to rebuild and align with your real community in mind? And so, right, my final reflections and call to action for us is to stop aligning with a we that was never intended for us. Right? It's for us to start defining our we based on our own terms, not the psychological confusion that they export for us to import into our minds. And remember that this conversation isn't just for us here in the United States. It is for us collectively the world over. And so if this message resonated with you, I ask you to share it with someone who is a part of your we, someone who already understands or is looking to deepen their understanding of Black unity and African-centered thought, right? So you can strengthen your circle by continuing this dialogue together. And if there's someone in your life who you like to offer some political education to, someone who may be still caught in the illusion of false inclusion, send this their way, right? Help build them up or build with them, challenge them, spark a conversation that helps all of us move closer to real, conscious, and empowered we. So at the end of the day, the strength of our we is how we build together. And so as always, I appreciate you taking the time to listen, to contribute and build on this conversation here in Afrosynthesis. And I'll see you next week. So it is, and so shall it be.